How's it going, everyone? Marriland here! It was recently shown in CoroCoro that the legendary Pokemon Zygarde was getting not just one, but 4 new forms, one of which was a small green blob that was shown at the end of the Japanese showing of Hoopa and the Clash of Ages. CoroCoro also showed a new, form of Greninja that led to a lot of confusion and speculation. I typically try to avoid making videos focusing solely on leaked CoroCoro scans, though, and I prefer waiting until we can get the full details. The wait was hopefully worth it, though, as today, the Pokemon Company International has officially revealed and acknowledged these new Zygarde forms, as well as Ash-Greninja. Here's a look at all of Zygarde's 5 forms. Let's start with the Zygarde we all know and love. Well, at least that we all know. That's actually Zygarde with just 50% of its cells. 50%. As the official website says, this legendary Pokemon watches over and maintains the local ecosystem. Until recently, this was the only known form of Zygarde. In actuality, this form only has 50% of the cells in its structure. Note how cells is properly capitalized. There is a reason for that. It's referring to Zygarde's cell. No, not that cell, this cell! This weird thing that looks kind of like an empty soybean pod is Zygarde's cell. Apparently there are a lot of these because they are necessary for Zygarde to reach its 50% form, or 2 of its other forms. According to the official website, this stage has been identified as the single cells that make up Zygarde. Cells do not possess any will or thought processes. They're found scattered throughout the region. Since they can't use any moves, researchers question whether they can even be called Pokemon. Well, hey, it worked for man-made Pokemon like Porygon and Mewtwo, so why not, right? At the core of Zygarde is, well, Zygarde Core. This thing is the mysterious green blob that was shown at the end of the Hoopa movie in Japan. The official site says that, at this stage, this aspect of Zygarde is little more than a part of the Pokemon's brain. Unlike the cells, the cores are self-aware and can communicate with cells and other cores via telepathy. When a change occurs in the local region's ecosystem, cores have been known to take action. Like Zygarde's cell, Zygarde Core does not have a form as part of its name, at least according to the website. That suggests that this little fella you see here is indeed the actual core of Zygarde. It also implies that there are numerous cores, not just the one. On top of that, it mentions more about the role of the cells, suggesting that they aren't self-aware and can't communicate with each other. Interesting. Lastly, keeping up with the Zygarde theme, when a change occurs in the region's ecosystem, cores taking action, several of them, does that mean we'll get a whole army of snakes? Well, not before first seeing... yeah, this thing. Not to be confused with Diamond Dog or Carbon Dog or whatever, but Zygarde 10% form, yeah, that's its name, is definitely a dog-like form, complete with a leash to take it on a walk and everything. The official site says that Zygarde 10% is the form that the Zygarde Core takes when it gathers 10% of the cells nearby. Capable of traveling over 60 miles per hour, it defeats enemies with its sharp fangs and its incredible speed. So apparently this is something that a Zygarde Core can become if it gathers 10% of the nearby cells. Yet, that's only 10% of its complete form. You've already seen its 50% form, but this massive beast is referred to as Zygarde Complete Form, and wow does it look massive. It's over 14 foot 6 inches and weighs over 1,340 pounds. That's 4.5 meters and 610 kilograms for everyone outside the US. The description of the official website says that this is the perfect form that Zygarde takes when the core gathers 100% of its cells. When the ecosystem is under threat and the core concludes that the 50% form will be unable to deal with it, the core takes on the complete form. Its power is said to be greater than that of the legendary Pokemon Xerneas and Yveltal. Zygarde Core attains this form when it gathers 100% of the cells? Yikes! So apparently if the ecosystem gets messed up terribly, and the snake Zygarde thingy can't handle it, the core will become Zygarde Complete Form. And wait, stronger than Xerneas and Yveltal? Well, thank goodness, because it was kind of strange that Zygarde's stats were rather subpar compared to Xerneas and Yveltal. Anyway, it turns out that these are indeed not new Pokemon, but rather new forms of an existing Pokemon, Zygarde, or however you pronounce it. There are a few reasons why this is significant, especially in regards to the next main series game, but I'll get to that in a bit. One other very important detail about these forms is that all forms of Zygarde will be tied into the Pokemon Anime series, starting on October 29th in Japan, which is called, get this, Pokemon X, Y, and Z. Pokemon Z confirmed? Well, at least for the anime, yes. But does that necessarily mean that the next game will actually be Pokemon Z? That's what it looks like, doesn't it? By all means, it might turn out to be that way, don't get me wrong. But that would effectively make it the sloppiest, most underwhelming big reveal for the past 3 cycles of games if that ends up to be the case. I love the Kalos region, and Pokemon X and Y remain my favorite Pokemon games of all time, but I'd be a little disappointed if the 20th anniversary game is to X and Y what, say, Platinum was to Diamond and Pearl. X and Y clearly left room for Z, since the theme was intended to be dimensions, and being on the 3DS, it seems natural to have the third dimension present, Z. But the last time only one Pokemon main series game was released at a time was Platinum, all the way back in 2009. Black and White had sequels in Black and White 2, which were not at all like Platinum was to Diamond and Pearl, since they continued the plot and featured an entirely new story. The announcement for Black and White 2 was also a much bigger surprise, with everyone expecting Pokemon Gray, and emphasis on Kyurem, of course, which that turned out to be true. It was announced on the Pokemon show Pokemon Smash in Japan, back on February of 2012, and it was announced worldwide immediately afterwards. It wasn't just leaked-in Koro or anything like that. No, they had a build-up that there'd be a big announcement, and there it was, Black and White 2. Pokemon X and Y were an even bigger deal. Mr. Satoru Iwata himself held a special Nintendo Direct on January 8th, 2013, to unveil Pokemon X and Y to the world. That was a huge deal because no one would have expected Pokemon to use a single letter for their game names, but think of what a powerful impact that's had on the series. Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby caught me off guard, personally, even though I totally called it, well, kinda, with the idea of including Alpha and Omega in the names. I actually didn't expect them to remake Ruby and Sapphire. I had hoped more for a Ruby 2 and Sapphire 2, to be honest. But whatever the case, we got remakes, and they were announced on May 7th, 2014, before Koro could leak them. The timing of January 8th for X and Y, and of May 7th for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is important, since it's enough time before Koro, and my suspicion is that they were fully aware of that fact, and that's why they chose those dates. So, if Pokemon Z is the next game, after careful coordination of announcing and shocking the world with Black and White 2, X and Y, and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they leave it to a Koro leak talking mostly about the anime rather than a huge, big announcement? Doesn't that seem a little odd? Of course, it's making us all think about Pokemon Z. I mean, look, it's right there! But don't you think something doesn't smell right with how they're revealing it? I know it's a little different, but in the Pokemon Best Wishes anime, during the time that Black and White 2 were released, in Japan at least, one of the blocks of episodes was called Best Wishes Season 2, Episode N. We didn't get that over here, it was just kind of a thing over there because of how they break up the seasons, but needless to say, it too was revealed in Koro, and it had a really cool teaser poster to go along with it. Of course, it didn't reveal any totally new forms of Pokemon, so it's still a little different, but at the same time, it is kind of similar. The Pokemon X, Y, and Z teaser is solely for the anime series. That's the only thing that Pokemon X, Y, and Z is referencing, the 19th season of the Pokemon anime. The Koro scan doesn't say anything about a Pokemon Z game, just the Pokemon X, Y, and Z season title. So that would now make Pokemon Z the first game to be based off of the Pokemon anime since Pokemon Yellow. Yeah. Let's talk about what we do know about the next main series game, or games. Two things of main importance, aside from the Zygarde stuff, of course. First, in an interview that Nintendo World Report conducted with J.C. Smith, Director of Consumer Marketing for the Pokemon Company International, when asked to throw a cryptic word out there that will make no sense at first, but will make sense 8 months from now, J.C. Smith replied with, flowers. Flowers. That's it. But that is telling, especially with flowers being rather vital to the ecosystem. It's still definitely likely that Zygarde and its bevy of forms will play a role in the next game or games, Z or otherwise, and the fact that it's so sensitive to the ecosystem helps back up that whole flowers claim. The other thing of importance was an on-screen graphic shown during the press conference announcing Pokemon Go, a smartphone augmented reality Pokemon game coming in 2016. Don't worry, from the sounds of things, it won't be a main series Pokemon game, since they are apparently looking for a clever way to tie it into the next main game or games. But anyway, back to the graphic. Take a look at it. It shows 20 years of Pokemon, featuring each and every new generation. Red and Green were first, back in 1996. Diamond and Pearl, the 4th generation, launched in 2006 in Japan. 2016 is clearly pointed out on that timeline, 3 years after the 6th generation, but there are no games for it there. This is a strong indicator that 2016 will actually introduce a new generation. As you can see from that graphic, a 3-year span between generations isn't actually uncommon like so many people assume it is, so it's certainly possible the next game or games will be in Generation 7. In which case, it's possible Zygarde won't even play a central role to the plot, since it won't even be a new Pokemon, meaning Zygarde's role will remain exclusive to the anime. It's a bit too much speculation at this point, though, as to whether the next games will be in Gen 6 or Gen 7, and whether or not Zygarde will play a role in it, but it's absolutely certain that Zygarde's new forms will be shown on the anime before any games, possibly the 2016 movie, too. Alright. What about Ash-Greninja? Yeah, so that's a thing. It was shown in the Koro scan and was also officially revealed today on the Pokemon website, saying that Ash's Greninja takes on a mysterious new appearance in the latest season. Ash-Greninja is the form that Greninja takes when the bond between it and Ash is raised to the limit. It also goes on to say that the strength of their bond changes Greninja's appearance, and it takes on the characteristic look of Ash's attire. Lastly, and most importantly about Ash-Greninja, this phenomenon is also said to have happened just once, several hundred years ago in the Kalos region, but it remains shrouded in mystery. Wait, could that be a reference to AZ's Floette, who resembles both AZ and the ultimate weapon? If you thought that, you probably thought that was a good guess, and it was, but unfortunately it's wrong. No, not even probably wrong, but absolutely wrong, and let me tell you why. As a Kalos region history buff, the timeline doesn't fit. AZ fired the ultimate weapon 3,000 years ago, and it was revealed that he'd been waiting to see Floette for just that many years. That's in the thousands, not hundreds. Parfum Palace, on the other hand, was built just 300 years ago by the king of the Kalos region. It's interesting because after beating the game, examining the picture of the king on the wall reveals that it looks like AZ. That's fine and dandy, maybe it is AZ or maybe it's not, but going back to that history buff point, the palace was built after a war with neighboring regions, so it seems most likely that the previous phenomenon took place during that war, and it couldn't have been AZ's Floette because he hadn't seen Floette in 3,000 years. It's clearly not Mega Greninja. Well, at least it probably isn't, because they'd be more likely to get everyone hyped by just flat out saying, Mega Greninja, oh my gosh, it's happening, rather than Ash-Greninja. Which leads me to think that, hey, maybe it's all really just an anime thing. And maybe the anime doesn't follow the 3,000 year timeline for AZ. Maybe it is AZ's Floette after all. Just because it isn't logical in the games doesn't mean it can't be logical in the anime, especially since AZ hasn't been shown there yet, at least to my knowledge, and most likely will be during this whole arc. Heck, the next Pokemon movie could be AZ teaming up with Ash, fighting against an out-of-control Zygarde who's ticked off at Lysander for firing the ultimate weapon, then he reunites with Floette and they release it as a distribution for X, Y, Omega Ruby, and Alpha Sapphire. you know, Eternal Floette, it actually kind of exists in the data. Spoilers. That explanation doesn't require a new game, though. Zygarde's forms, of course, would likely require them at some point, but that could be revisited in the next game, or games, Z or otherwise. The point is, everything that was shown in Koro and in today's update is only referring to the anime, so it's possible that it may stay contained within the anime and that Pokemon X, Y, and Z is a red herring. Pokemon likes surprises. Their 20th anniversary will be a big one. They could announce something in early January to kick off their 20th anniversary, but they'll still need a chance to do something in the anime series, since it looks like they're not going back to Hoenn anytime soon, so maybe that's the whole point of Pokemon X, Y, and Z. Maybe not. Who knows? They could have a totally expected, predictable game that ties into the anime as their 20th anniversary game, or they could look beyond that and surprise us with something we never saw coming, like Black and White 2 or X and Y. Either way, I'm excited to see what Pokemon will do in 2016. I think the new Zygarde forms look pretty cool, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Do I think there's absolutely, positively no way that the next game will be Pokemon Z or anything similar? No, not at all. I'm just throwing out my thoughts based on as much information as possible, and based on that information, I believe that Pokemon X, Y, and Z will be just an anime thing, just so Pokemon can surprise us. Anyway, whether you agree with me or not, I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope that it got you to at least think about things. I hope you'll also consider subscribing, maybe leaving a like, or best yet, leaving a comment, telling your thoughts on the matter. Let's get the discussion going. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.